I would just go ahead and get started here. And so, next slide, please, Bucky. And so, why are we here? Well, this meeting, the series of meetings are actually being held so that we can provide some information, a little bit of education about the project as it currently sits, and to get feedback and information from you. We talk about an NFI, or the non-federal interest. That is the Rankin-Hines Pearl River Flood and Drainage Control District. Why are we here? We are here because they made a submittal of a draft feasibility study, environmental impact statement. They made that submission to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, Mr. Connor. They made that submittal as a part of an authorization from Section 3104, and we'll talk about the authorizations just a little bit. And the whole history of this, we'll get into this in some detail, but as you all are aware, the Flood River has flooded numerous times in the last 100 years with significant impacts to people and property. And the report that we're speaking of would be the non-federal interest report that was prepared and submitted to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, his office, in July of 2022. And we'll talk about the review process in just a moment. So next, please, next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, there have been a series of meetings. We held meetings last Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday was in Slidell, we had 2 sessions, and Wednesday was in Jackson, Mississippi, and we had 2 sessions. So this is the last session for this virtual meeting today. I would mention that there will be other public engagements. As I mentioned earlier, please keep up with the website address, as we would, that would be one of the best ways to keep you informed of the status and where we're going. And not only that, it gives you the opportunity to provide some input. Speaking of input, down at the very bottom of this slide, you see that we have multiple ways of doing so. Currently, at this public meeting, we don't have any self-addressed comment cards you can use, of course, but traditional mail, there's an address, and then there's an email address. Next slide, please. Okay, and at this time, Ms. Walker, who is speaking for Ms. Colosimo on her behalf. Audrey.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. All right, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you participating this evening and giving up some of your valuable evening time with your family or dinner plans and so forth. So thank you very much for participating. We look forward to working with you and all interested parties to solve the flood risk management problems that have long plagued communities in the Pearl River drainage. As was mentioned, my name is Andrea Walker, and I work in the Project Planning and Review branch in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. Our leader is Michael Connor, who serves as the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. He could not be with us this evening, but we do have a video with a message from him that we would like to share.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Connor, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. I provide policy oversight and direction for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works program. Thank you for joining us at this community engagement session on solutions to address flooding along the Pearl River in Mississippi. We look forward to hearing from you about your needs and concerns regarding flooding issues and a proposed project to address these challenges. As all of you know, the city of Jackson, Mississippi has experienced devastating floods as recently as 2020 and 2022. I saw firsthand some of this flooding in August of last year in a visit to discuss a proposed project. It is a priority to provide the people of Jackson with effective near-term solutions to their flood risks and we have a tremendous opportunity to deliver these solutions through the bipartisan infrastructure law and funding provided through that mechanism. This administration has set aside sufficient funding to complete planning and implementation plans consistent with existing authorities and in compliance with federal environmental laws. Your input today and final technical report from this effort will inform my decision on the solutions we will implement to reduce flood risk in Jackson. I appreciate your time and input today as we work together to find the best solution for the Pearl River, Jackson, and this region of Mississippi. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We are very honored to have Mr. Connor as our leader. He has vast experience in solving complex water resource problems at the federal and regional levels, including his prior assignment as the Deputy Secretary for the Department of Interior. Secretary Connor will ultimately be the decision maker for any recommendation relative to flooding in Jackson. So we'll discuss more on that as we go through. Again, our office provides policy oversight of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works program. We provide oversight for the plans, design, construction, and operation of infrastructure that currently address flood, navigation, ecosystem restoration, and other needs for communities and citizens of this country. I echo Secretary Connor's statement that we look forward to hearing from you about your needs and concerns regarding flooding issues and a potential flood risk management project to address these challenges. Next slide, please. So again, why are we here? We're here to talk further about the flooding effects from the Pearl River. We want to advance flood risk management solutions after decades of repetitive flooding in Jackson and throughout the basin. For over 100 years, headwater flooding in the Pearl River has caused disruption to businesses, industry, and citizens throughout Jackson, Mississippi. In this time, more than 5,000 commercial and residential structures have sustained damages, which have created impacts to a population of over 500,000. Notable flood events in 1979 and 1983, and more recently in 2020 and 2022. In 1979, the flood event flooded transportation routes, homes, and businesses. In 1979, the damages from that event alone were more than $223 million in 1979 values. The highest crest on the Pearl River was in 2020, and it notably impacted at least 2 minority and low-income areas of Jackson. During the 2022 event, Secretary Connor was touring the Jackson area when the rain was falling and the river stage was rising. In addition to these impacts I've already discussed, the Pearl River Basin also has a tremendous environmental value, including wetlands that filter waters that eventually flow into the Gulf of Mexico and support thousands of geese, ducks, birds, migratory birds, and turtles and beyond. For decades, the Corps and non-federal interests have sought to solve the flood risk management problems in Jackson and throughout the basin, but a lack of project justification, community support, and funding have stalled meaningful progress. Again, we look forward to working with parties like yourself to solve the flood risk management problems that have long plagued communities throughout this basin. Next slide. So there is a federal interest for this issue and trying to provide flood risk management solutions to Jackson, Mississippi, and throughout the basin. In 1986, Congress authorized the Corps to plan, design, and implement a flood risk management project. In 2007, that authorization was modified to allow the Secretary of the Army for Civil Works to select and implement an appropriate flood risk management plan without the need for further effort by the Congress. Normally, the Corps would get an authorization for a study and make a recommendation, and then we'd have to get another authorization to implement that. Through this section 3104 of the Water Resources Development Act of 2007, Congress gave us all our permission at one time. That is a big deal. So getting back to the 3104 authorization, we were directed that the Secretary may construct a National Economic Development Plan, which we'll describe later, the locally preferred plan, which is one that the Rankin-Hines Flood and Drainage Control District has put forward, or some combination thereof. Additionally, the Secretary must make a determination that if a locally preferred plan is selected, that it provides at least the same level of flood damage reduction as that National Economic Development Plan. And further, a plan needs to be environmentally acceptable and technically feasible. And then lastly, we received an additional authorization in the Water Resources Development Act of 2018, which directed the Secretary to also assess downstream effects. So bottom line, this has demonstrated that there is a federal interest in looking into this issue. We have not been able to do so in the past because we lacked a plan and we lacked funding. But thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we now have funding to go along with that authorization. Can I have the next? No. Okay, I'm sorry. So as I was saying, the bipartisan infrastructure law has provided funds for the Secretary to direct the Corps to identify, design, and implement a flood risk management project subject to the approval by the Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. So now we have the authority and we have federal funds. We can advance a solution quickly. The pieces are falling into place. We are excited to reinvigorate the technical and community work to deliver for Jackson. Again, I thank you for your participation this evening. I look forward to our dialogue, and I will turn things over to Colonel Klein. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Colonel Chris Klein, commander of the Vicksburg District. We oversee the Pearl River watershed. That's one of 9 watersheds that we oversee and execute the Civil Works project on. These sessions, we've received a lot of really good feedback, and thank you everybody for tuning in. I can tell that these virtual sessions were good, whether it was 1 person or 1,000 people. The feedback that you provide is absolutely phenomenal. So what we've learned up to this point, and it's been a huge learn, we're seeing downstream effects now. All right, we've got saltwater intrusion, we've got flash flooding, we've got erosion and silting issues. We've heard a story, the story of aging infrastructure and those impacts, as well as we've heard the concerns about impacts to habitat, and that is habitat downstream. We've also heard, the concerns about what's going to happen up in Jackson. That includes habitat and wetland impacts. We've also heard, the opportunities for hope, how folks are seeing this as an opportunity for revitalization, and providing that feedback of really what folks want, and that is, a river that works for them. So how do we connect the community back to the river? How do we ensure that water is staying out of communities that aren't supposed to have water in them and on their streets? And really, that's where our focus is today. And so, thank you everybody for participating in this public process. If you can go to the next slide, please, Bucky. Yeah. So the Pearl River's got a long history of both navigation and flood control. Navigation has stopped, especially on the lower Pearl. And now we're focused on, flood control. And the flood control story started in Jackson with the initial levee structures in 1968. And then we had that flood of record in 1979. Since that flood of record in 1979, there have been multiple locally proposed as well as Corps of Engineers proposed solutions to mitigate the flood risks to the city of Jackson. In this latest locally presented plan, it was prepared under Section 211 of the Water Resources Development Act of 1996. It's been reviewed and it's been presented underneath that authority to the Secretary for consideration, which brings us to the work that the Secretary has asked us to do today. You go to the next slide, please. So our latest efforts started at the end of last year, 2022, by the direction of the Secretary. And our mission is to build off of previous work, and that's all previous work, to develop a report that assesses an array of options for technical feasibility, which includes being economically justifiable, environmental acceptability, and legal compliance. And really in here, the two most critical items that we're looking for at this point are identifying the National Economic Development Plan. You heard Ms. Walker mention that term, the National Economic Development Plan. So what is that? That is the plan that has the greatest benefit to meet national economic growth priorities. It is also the plan that has the greatest economic benefit in prevention of damages. And so that's what we're working to identify right now, as well as complete our environmental compliance activities. When we do identify that NED plan, we have to understand that NED plan becomes the baseline. It's the baseline against which all other options and arrays are assessed off of. And any other option must provide at least as much, if not more, flood protection than that NED plan. In addition to identifying the NED plan and doing what we do normally as the Corps, the Secretary has also directed us to provide an analysis of the comprehensive benefits. So these are both the quantitative as well as qualitative benefits. Quantitative being those things that you can measure, qualitative being those options that don't necessarily present themselves through numbers. So, hey, how we reconnect the community to a river. Opportunities for revitalization. What are those things that a project could potentially afford to the community in the future that aren't normally measured during our processes? What communities are impacted? Are those communities are relieved? So we're taking a really hard look at those qualitative benefits of any project that is presented. I want to remind folks again that the Corps of Engineers is neither a proponent or an opponent of any one project. What we want to do is we want to deliver a flood risk mitigation and flood risk management solution for the city of Jackson. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie, who's going to take us through what the technical team is doing and where we're at.
Hi, so I'm Leslie Brokowska, the plan formulator. I'm with the Regional Planning and Environment Division South. And again, thank you so much for your time today. Go to the next slide, but I'm going to go ahead and give you some details of what the non-federal interest report, what the alternatives were. So the non-federal interest report that was submitted was under Section 211, and it built upon the historical studies and assessed over 60 different flood reduction features. At the conclusion of that report, 3 plans were identified for further assessment that looked the most promising. There was a non-structural plan, a levee plan, and a channel improvement plan. The non-structural plan included the relocating of structures and the purchase of the property that the structures were on within the 500-year floodplain. The second alternative was a levee-only plan, which included upgrading existing levees, construction of additional levee segments and/or flood walls in unprotected areas, and the addition of pumps and/or gated structures. The third alternative was a channel improvement plan. That was the non-federal interest preferred plan, and that consisted of increasing the channel capacity through excavation, demolition of the existing weir near J.H. Fuel water treatment plant site, and construction of a new weir with a low flow gate and fish passage structure further downstream. federal levee improvements, which is where we propose the location for the placement of excavated material, and upgrading an existing non-federal levee into a federalized ring levee around the Savannah Street wastewater treatment plant. So that was a final array, the final 3 alternatives from the NFI report. Moving forward, and next slide. Since that report's submittal, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Rankin-Hines have been working collaboratively on understanding the locally preferred plan in their final array submittal. From there, as stated, we're going to go ahead, the U.S. Corps of Engineers, we're preparing the draft environmental impact statement to identify the NED plan as previously discussed, compare the level of flood protection in that plan to the level of flood protection provided by all the alternatives being assessed, and additionally, going to assess the downstream impacts of the Pearl River Basin. The comparison of plans is going to include the non-federal interest section 211 final plans as discussed in the previous slide. Non-structural alternatives, those are ones where it's only non-structural. You're not building something that's going to change the hydrology. So A being the NFI one, then there's going to be A1. That's a new one that we're currently working on and developing in collaboration with the public's feedback, which is going to be finding such items as potentially elevating residential structures, flood-proofing commercial and non-residential structures or residential that are historic properties. It could be potential for buyouts. So that plan is in development. That's a new plan. Then you have alternative C, which is a channel improvement plan from the Section 211 report submitted by the NFI. Then, as authorized, we could potentially assess a combination or hybrid alternative of an NED and a LPP, locally preferred plan, and other potentials that are currently being brought to the forefront are going to potentially be included in this draft EIS and assessed. Next slide. But just to reiterate, a plan has not been identified for us that we are recommending or evaluating. These are just some that we're considering to assess at this point. So here's our study area. The Pearl River watershed is really large. It's over 8,000 square miles. It's a very large area. But what we're focusing on for the primary study area is where we're trying to achieve flood risk management benefits. It's including, we're focusing between River Mile 270, which is located just south of Richland, Mississippi, to River Mile 302, which is at the foot of the Ross Barnett Reservoir Dam. And if you look at this figure here, you can see that both sides, the east and west, it comprise Hinds and Rankin counties in Mississippi. And the tributaries are shown here. So our modeling for existing conditions, the preliminary model right now that we're looking at for the 100-year event is shown on the screen in gray. It's preliminary, but you can see that the tributaries there are being assessed and are now included in the hydraulic model. One other item to mention that we learned, and we heard a lot of feedback, was the downstream impacts. So no, even though the study area is focused on assessing and developing the benefits for reducing flood risk, this is by no means limited to this area for us to evaluate and assess for the area of influence, where there could be potential hydraulic impacts, environmental impacts. That is a much larger area. If there's an area that is where anything with project of potentially influence will be considered in the assessment. All right, next slide. So in addition to finding the NED plan and comparing it for a flood level of risk reduction, you heard Colonel Klein discuss comprehensive benefits. comprehensive benefits, AKA layman's terms, areas of interest, is presented here. We've identified some preliminary ones so far, but this is not limited, and this is where we're asking for the feedback and chat to include what things are helping us tell a story, and get the input out there to help inform Mr. Connor for his decision. So how can we best tell him exactly, you know, concerns and impacts, concerns of regarding of benefits, give a full picture for Mr. Connor. Some of the things that have been identified right now, the primary item is, of course, flood risk reduction, but water supply, we understand that's very important, and that no compromise to the water supply system is a huge concern and something that we're definitely going, keeping in the forefront. Water and wastewater treatment plants into the river system, ecosystem environmental impacts, existing waste sites, cultural resources, transportation, downstream impacts, recreational access and opportunities, community impacts such as cohesion, quality of life, and economic opportunity. I do want to point out on the cultural resources that we do have an NOI currently out on our website regarding a notice of intent to develop a programmatic agreement under Section 106. So you can find that notice of intent on our website as well. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to Colonel Klein. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. If we can go to the next slide. This is going to show us our timeline and where we're at. And right now, the technical team's work is continuing, and we're here in this public and agency outreach. We're here to receive your feedback and incorporate that into the work that we're doing. By August, we'll have a draft report complete. That's going to go again out for review. That will inform the final report, which will be complete in December and submitted to the Secretary for decision. It's a really streamlined timeline, but it's feasible because we're building on years of work, many years of work, many years of feedback. And so just know that that is all being taken into account into this final stage as well, and will inform the Secretary's decision. So with that, we're going to turn it back over to our moderator and open it up for public comments.
Thank you, sir. Next slide, Bucky, please. So I mentioned at the very beginning of the meeting, we do value your feedback and your input. We will be accepting feedback and input through the 30th of June of this year. There are multiple ways in which you can provide that feedback. Of course, there is an email there, and we're going to leave this slide up for the remainder of the meeting. Of course, there is normal mail through the U.S. Postal Service. The address that needs to go to is there. And then lastly, I mentioned a project website. Our project website is listed right there. Many materials are currently out there. Many more will be added as we go along. And so with that, I just remind everybody as we start into the feedback period, try to limit your questions to basically 3 minutes, and please wait until you're recognized before you begin. Last time we started with people raising their hands. Let's go straight to the chat this time, Bucky, and let's look at the chat. So are there any comments there? We've got several people that have done just exactly what we asked. They've listed their name and who they are and what they're doing. I'm trying to see if anybody's actually got any statements. There was a gentleman just a few minutes ago that made a statement. I don't see his right now. He said he wanted to make a public statement. His first name was Leo. Sir, are you still on the line?
Yes, sir. How y'all doing this evening?
Okay, Mr. Carney, go right ahead.
Okay. concerning the One Lake project in particular, I wanted to ask about the flooding downstream that you all mentioned, and I wanted to ask, have we considered uh, the environmental impacts of neglected tropical diseases and the impact that would have on those communities in these studies? Thank you.
I have to say that's a new comment, but I'm certainly glad you brought that to our attention, and we'll see what we can do as far as investigating that. But thank you. Appreciate that.
Can you say the type of diseases one more time so I can write it down correctly? We have down in Slidell, we did hear about coliform bacteria buildups down lower Pearl because of low oxygenation and low flow. But I just want to make sure I get that right.
It's neglected tropical diseases. The study was done by Dr. Peter Hotez of Baylor University, and I think it was a study that talked about deforestation and how standing water in these communities contribute to neglected tropical diseases like hookworm and Zika and other diseases.
It's great. Thank you.
Okay, looks like we had Mr. Whitehurst, Andrew Whitehurst. You have a verbal comment?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I had a comment about recreational access and opportunities. That's one of your scoping factors. It wasn't talked about adequately at the previous meetings. Speakers at the May 24th public engagement meeting in Jackson complained about the lack of public access to the Pearl in urban Jackson. There is public access to the river in Jackson for canoes, kayaks, and small boats. There's access on public lands to trails along Oxbow Lakes and riverbanks in LaFleur's Bluff State Park on the Pearl, just downstream of the Highway 25 bridge. LaFleur's Bluff State Park has the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science on its grounds, and the park and museum share a 2-mile trail system, including the museum's Purple Trail, color-coded along the Pearl River, that ends at the park's public boat ramp and parking lot. There's demonstrated public use of the river in the park. The Museum of Natural Science built its science education program around the state park using wetlands and floodplain forests along the Pearl to teach thousands of students and to train hundreds of teachers at Project Wet and Project Wild workshops. The museum reached its first million visitor mark by 2010 and is one of Jackson's award-winning tourism and educational attractions. The Alternative C project will dredge away many acres of LaFleur's Bluff State Park along the Pearl. Along the river trail, it would take one of the most beautiful spots in the city, and it would reduce the quality of the park experience. A riverbank lined with mature 90-year-old hardwood trees and a network of floodplain sloughs and oxbow lakes with mature cypress and tupelo gums in the park would be removed by dredging and replaced by banks devoid of trees and a shoreline stabilized by sheet piling, concrete, or limestone riprap. The people promoting Alternative C do not care whether LaFleur's Bluff State Park is dredged. These people don't need public green spaces. They have gentlemen's hunting camps in the Mississippi Delta, and they fish for tuna and billfish in the Gulf. I wanted to speak up for a well-used and appreciated 390-acre piece of public green space that is close by, well-used, and it doesn't require a membership. So when you come back to Jackson, I'd like you to go see Mays Lake, lower section of LaFleur's Bluff State Park, and go see the Science Museum that interprets the park and interprets the Pearl River. It was put there on purpose, moved in 1999 from downtown. So I just thought the public use of the section of the river needed to have LaFleur's Bluff State Park highlighted. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehurst. And yes, we have heard from others of concerns they have with potential impacts to LaFleur Bluff State Park. And yes, one of my visits to Jackson, I would love to go and see these wonderful facilities. Public always wants more if they can. So if we have an opportunity to do something about that, that's always a good thing. But we'll certainly be mindful of the state park impacts going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next, let's recognize Chantel Dominguez.
Yes, hello everyone. Can you hear me all right? Awesome. Hi, on behalf of American Rivers members and supporters, thank you so much for the opportunity to share our concerns about the One Lake project specifically. American Rivers is a premier national organization working to protect and restore all rivers, from remote mountain streams to urban waterways. We know that clean water is a fundamental human right, and that without healthy rivers, communities suffer. Rivers provide our drinking water, grow our food, and sustain our spirits. The proposed One Lake project threatens all of that for a real estate development project to create new waterfront property that is being falsely packaged as a solution to the community's flooding problems. Large, infrequent floods can take lives and destroy property, which is why we have tried so hard to control them with levees and dams. Unfortunately, most people don't realize how harmful these engineered structures can be. These structures can be overwhelmed by large floods. When they break or overtop, they release massive amounts of water all at once, threatening lives, destroying homes and businesses, and costing Americans millions of dollars. Dams like the one proposed on the Pearl River often prioritize the needs of downstream communities in the name of flood control, while exacerbating flooding for communities upstream of the dam and impoundment. The creation of One Lake will permanently elevate water levels in 8 tributary creeks that flow through primarily low-income Black neighborhoods in Jackson. So this means that it will take far less rain and runoff for vulnerable neighborhoods to flood. The cascading effects of building this dam don't stop there. If approved, One Lake would expose communities to toxic pollution, worsen Jackson's drinking water crisis, and destroy floodplain and wetland habitat that provides natural flood protection for local communities. Instead, we are urging the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to protect the Pearl River for people and wildlife that it supports by rejecting the One Lake project. The Army Corps should prioritize non-structural and natural infrastructure solutions, such as some of those proposed in the National Economic Development Plan, that could provide effective, environmentally sustainable flood relief to Jackson while protecting the river's unique ecology and wildlife. I thank you all so much for your time, and thank you for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, I see Audrey Harrison has her hand up.
I do. Thank you so much for opening this public forum. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes, we can.
I am a Hinds County resident, and I have more of a question than a comment. I am curious as to if or when there has been a comprehensive baseline floral and faunal assemblage survey conducted within the project area. So an assessment that is comprehensive of the plants and animals that occur within the project area. And I have a follow-up question depending on the answer to the question.
That is going to be part of our existing conditions that we're going to assess and write to in coordination with our coordinating agencies that will build upon that.
Okay, would the Corps be responsible for that assessment, or would that be the non-federal sponsor doing that assessment?
It will be part of the Corps' report. So it'll be the Corps with some of the coordinating agencies and building on some of the work that's been done.
Okay, thank you.
I see a hand raised from Pearl Riverkeeper. If you would, please identify yourself and go ahead and ask.
Good evening. This is Abby Brayman with Pearl Riverkeeper. Thank you for the opportunity to ask just 2 more questions. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers independent reviewers both consider Alt-C/One Lake the most environmentally damaging plan. Their comments include, quote, "In my opinion, we are neither compliant with nor operating within the spirit of the Clean Water Act," end quote, and, quote, "There appears to be little consideration for environmental impacts within the selection process," end quote. The 2018 DEIS did not contain any adaptive management or mitigation plans. So my first question for you are, will the DEIS released by the Corps in September include specific adaptive management and mitigation plans with associated costs for each project alternative? And will your DEIS identify the location of property in the watershed that could provide appropriate mitigation for the 2,000 acres of wetlands loss associated with Alt-C/One Lake?
Speaking to the real estate, we're just beginning to look at the real estate requirements. A plan has not been identified. Once a plan's been identified, the real estate requirements will be further looked into. We anticipate there'd be standard core processes. As far as alternate C, being assessed for environmental, we are revisiting those impacts right now with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well for that alternative, speaking to that first question.
Okay, so so you're going to plan on releasing your DEIS in September, correct? September 1st. So at that time, will there be property identified that could be mitigation for the wetlands loss?
Perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we'll have general locations of features. We may not be down to the exact parcels, but we will definitely identify general areas.
Okay. And as you know, in the 2018 comment letter, Mississippi Department of Transportation stated that if the predicted scour depths occur, there will be catastrophic failure of all 7 of the main channel bridges. I know you're very familiar with that. So does Alt-C/One Lake in your DEIS include a plan to maintain integrity of our Jackson interstate bridges? And what is the cost of that plan? And is the cost reflected in the cost of Alt-C/One Lake in your new DEIS? Because in the 2018 DEIS, there was no cost for bridges associated.
Our team is currently assessing that right now with the engineering division.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bucky, do we have any more hands raised?
No more hands raised. That way we got to Charmaine Morrison.
Okay. Charmaine Morrison, did you want to make a statement?
Yes, good evening. Charmaine Morrison with Earth Justice. I'll start by saying that robust public involvement is essential to an informed decision-making process regarding the proposed One Lake project. And as we've already heard from other commenters, the project threatens a series of severe environmental and public health impacts, including destruction of many acres of bottomland hardwood forests and riverine habitats, and the disturbance of several contaminated waste sites. So moving forward, the Corps must engage with the public in a manner that complies with NEPA and all other relevant authorities in order to ensure that the agency understands and closely evaluates the full scope of potential impacts of One Lake. And we appreciate that this scoping process represents an early stage in the life of this project proposal, and that there will be more opportunities for the public to submit comments in the future. But we will expect the Corps to proceed with future stages in a more organized manner than what we've seen thus far in this renewed scoping stage. I'll offer just a couple examples. To begin, the Corps announced these public meetings for the first time to a limited audience on May 15th, and only announced the meetings in the Federal Register on May 18th. This meant that the public had at most only 8 days notice of the first of the 2 in-person public meetings on May 23rd, and that's simply not sufficient. NEPA regulations for other federal agencies hold that public scoping meetings should be held at least 15 days after public notification. And in many circumstances, even 15 days will not be enough to ensure that affected members of the public have notice of and access to public meetings. So moving forward, the public should have at least 30 days notice of public meetings on One Lake. Second, the Corps didn't make clear until May 18th that the current process was meant to satisfy the agency's scoping obligations under NEPA. And even then, information about the project has trickled onto the website in a somewhat piecemeal fashion. All we basically have so far are a few high-level PowerPoint presentations and a couple maps. Per the Corps' own NEPA regulations, the scoping process is the key to preparing a concise EIS and clarifying the significant issues to be analyzed in depth. The regulations further hold that public concerns on issues, studies needed, alternatives to be examined, all these things will be addressed during scoping. The Corps has not provided enough details about this project proposal for the public to have a meaningful opportunity to comment on it, and this somewhat undermines the purpose of the scoping process. Finally, the Corps has been fairly unclear about the deadline to submit online public comments in this scoping period. A May 17th email from Ms. Walker listed the comment deadline as June 31st. The Federal Register notice listed the deadline as June 20th. Finally, a PowerPoint on the Corps' website listed the deadline as June 30th, and that's of course what we see here. But a member of the public had to affirmatively contact the Corps to seek clarification on that deadline. And that lack of attention to details just makes it hard for the public to engage with the proposal and diminishes confidence that the public input will be taken seriously. So in closing, even appreciating that the scoping process is an early stage in the life of a NEPA proposal and that there will be more opportunities to comment, the Corps still has to follow applicable law at every stage of the project proposal. And again, meaningful public involvement is essential to an informed decision about One Lake, especially in light of the project's significant potential impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Appreciate those points, and we'll continue to make improvements moving forward to provide more notification for more meaningful discussion with the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nobody else. Wait, Richard Nicholas.
Okay, Richard Nicholas, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I just a question of just clarification based on some earlier comments I heard, because I do access to the river is something that's important. Question of clarification on just impact to trails and the boat ramp of Mays Lake. Didn't the LaFour's Lakes plan have kind of major impacts to the Mays Lake area? But my understanding is that the Alt-C minimizes impacts to that Mays Lake and it does not impact walking trails and the boat ramp of Mays Lake itself. Is that correct?
Well, I can say, sorry, Leslie, go ahead.
I was going to say that's currently being assessed right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And will that assessment be public?
Yes, that'll be documented in the report that the Corps prepares.
Thank you.
Okay, Jennifer W., did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I have a good question or statement, kind of piggybacking off of Ms. Morris. Earlier in the presentation, you all talked about that you all had conversations with different communities. I do hear a lot of different organizations being on this call. I do understand that there are people that have somewhat of a privilege that is on this call, but how many comments have you had from the underserved communities? Because ultimately they are the ones that are affected every single day. Those are the ones that may not be able to afford to move, may not be able to get those resources to themselves in regards to the different flooding issues that come with this whole development. And so what feedback have you, I'm sorry, from a dog, what feedback have you received from the public? Because I personally have been to the UC Berkeley presentation that was given, and I was there and having conversation with a lot of people in the community that had those concerns. And so from a citizen, first and foremost, that lives in Jackson, what have you heard from those people, our people, my people, in regards to this proposal or any proposal?
Yeah, Andrew, I can take that on if you want. So we had a lot of folks from there were folks from the communities along Town Creek that provided some very specific and vivid feedback on the backwater that happens up on Town Creek. One specific story about moccasins coming up to the front door that just stands out. Then we had a handful of pastors from the South Jackson area who presented public comment as well. Another lady impacted by the flooding. The gentleman, there was probably about a dozen specifically of families who were directly impacted by flooding, in that they either had to move a loved one, move themselves, couldn't afford the flood insurance. One particular individual who said, "I'm all in on a buyout. Can I do it right now because I can't afford the flood insurance anymore?" It was half a dozen to 15, to 15 to 20 in the at the Jackson specific sessions.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more question, if you don't mind. With us having the third party administrator in this role now, because he is a part or will be a part of this conversation, what conversations have you all had with him going forward with the water treatment plants that will be affected by this development?
Yeah, so Mr. Hennepin, he's new online, and I'll take this one on, as this is completely separate. It's separate but tangential to this project. And we are doing parts of that water facility upgrade and the sewage. So Mr. Hennepin's new. I do specifically have to reach out to him and just develop that relationship to see what they're going to, because currently 2 of our projects are delayed. So I need some movement on that too. So nothing yet. However, I will talk to him to get his feedback on options and how that will either create opportunity or impact his ability to provide clean drinking water to the citizens of Jackson. As we mentioned during the public meetings, there was a comment about how this would shut down the fuel plant. Any project would shut down the fuel plant for 3 years, and that is sorry, Andrew, I'm going to speak on behalf of the secretary here. That's a non-starter on behalf of the secretary's office, and the core would be directed at that point by the secretary to have no impact to the ability to deliver clean water to the city of Jackson.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, at this time, we don't have anybody else that has raised their hand or expressed an interest in the chat to speak. Adrian, okay. Adrian, do you have a statement you'd like to make?
Yeah, I just, I'm Adrienne Dodd. I'm a PhD student at UC Berkeley. And thank you so much for having this. I'm really excited to be here and learn more about this process. And I have a question about the process for assessing the different plans. And I think, you know, different plans may have different impacts on different parts of the watershed and have impacts on different parts of the communities in different ways. And so then I was wondering, when y'all are comparing the different plans, how will flood mitigation be prioritized across the watershed, or how will it be prioritized in different areas? And will like the number of housing units exposed or the number of people exposed be considered? Or how is that done?
Leslie, you want to take first shot? Yeah.
Sure. So first, with identifying the NED, that's the National Economic Development Plan. So that one's going to be identified. That is one of the things we've been charged with. When we identify that one, all the plans are going to be assessed to make sure they are providing at least the same equal amount of level of flood protection. As far as prioritizing the areas, some of the social vulnerable areas will be discussed in the comprehensive benefits. So while that isn't necessarily used to identify what the National Economic Development Plan is, that's where those comprehensive benefits areas of interest will be used to discuss and inform for the Secretary to make a decision. So that will be how it's kind of prioritized and compared, you know, with that extra comprehensive benefits.
Hey, so this is Robin. Can I add to this?
Yes,
Please.
ma'am.
So sorry, I'm not on camera, folks. I'm out of town on leave and my camera's not working, but Robin Colosimo, Army Civil Works. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works for project planning and review. So just want to take this up a big level. So appreciate your question here, but big picture is the only reason the Corps has this authority is because flood risk management is part of our main mission set. So we were directed under a series of pieces of legislation around a project in Pearl. And so flood risk management is the focus here. And then everything else happens as a consequence of how much of that flooding problem can we solve. Now, the reason it's kind of in a different space than we normally start a study is there's been decades worth of work being done here. And it's being reinvigorated with the bipartisan infrastructure law money. So it's allowing us to fill the gaps, begin this early engagement, and start to dive into where those areas are consistent with, was it Section 3104 from Word of 2007? I get the numbers confused when I'm on leave, particularly. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then I'll jump in there with a quick one on, yeah, we do assess structures impacted. All right, so to answer that one just directly, you know, number of structures impacted must be minimized. And what we've heard from the, you know, through these multiple sessions is specifically how water backs up into the tributaries and impacts those communities along the tributaries. You know, four major ones, and they are in traditionally underserved EJ communities, if you will. And so I sent out a message after those first public sessions to the team, you know, saying, hey, reinvigorate focus on the tributaries and how any proposal relieves flooding in the tributaries. Over.
Any other? I do not see any more hands raised for statements. And
Pearl River Keeper again.
okay, Pearl River Keeper, would you please identify yourself and make your statement?
Yes, if you'd indulge me, have another question. I have a lot of questions about this project, so if I'm able, I'm going to take advantage. So another question that I have is the Ross Barnett Reservoir is currently operated independently by Pearl River Valley Water Supply District for recreation and water supply. It has a minimum low flow required by law and has also operated lately to provide some flood management services for Jackson. So I'm interested to know if the Corps has engaged with the Pearl River Valley staff to discuss how another lake 10 miles south of their reservoir could complicate their operations. This was not addressed at all in the 2018 DEIS. So for example, during low flow summer months, if minimum low flow, like required for Savannah Street wastewater treatment plant permit, if that's not flowing from the new lake, would Pearl River Valley be legally required to release more water from the reservoir? Or conversely, how would Pearl River Valley be required to operate under flood conditions, and which lake would take priority? So have you consulted with Pearl River Valley on how these two lakes would operate concurrently? Thank you.
Leslie, I'll take that. I would say no, and the technical team is currently, no is the immediate answer on that. And it's because the technical team is still in the middle of doing their work. However, yes, the water control manual of the Pearl River, of the Ross Barnett Reservoir is being included in the analysis of how it would impact the lake or that particular proposed project. The operation of Ross Barnett will be included in the analysis of any proposed project and any of the alternatives that go forward to the Secretary.
Hey, this is Robin Colosimo again. I just want to add to that a couple things. First and foremost, when we model based on their current operations manual. We know that they have deviated on occasion. That doesn't mean we expect it to be deviated. They're required to operate by their manual. So that's what we're going to look at. But last two sessions that we had on the landscape, there were a lot of questions about how folks operate that reservoir in certain conditions. So we want to provide transparency as well about any areas where people have seen or perceived anomalies around that and whether we need to look at that. But no, we're not required to we're not going to go and tell them how to operate the reservoir. We're going to take it as it is. That said, we did become aware they've done a master plan update here recently. Don't know where they are in that. And they actually say flood mitigation is one of their goals and objectives. So that's one of the things the Colonel and I talked about, making sure we engage them on is what was that objective about and what did they look at? So are there things we can glean from that in addition to understanding if they're about to change operations? Over.
Thank you. I just think there may be a need for maybe some legislation to go through the legislature on how the levee board and Pearl River Valley would have to operate concurrently and what the requirements to each other would have to be. But thank you for this information.
Okay. Well, seeing no more hands raised and no more questions in the chat box.
Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry. I'm calling in. I'm not on the video conference. I'm on an audio access through my phone, and I would like to ask the question if possible.
Sure. If you don't mind, do you mind giving us maybe your name so we'll know kind of who we're talking to as part of the public record?
Yes. My name is Jennifer Blanchard. I'm calling as a citizen of Louisiana, and I am a former citizen of the Honey Island Swamp area of the Pearl River, the lower Pearl River, and I'm calling listening in, and I came into the call late, so you have to forgive me. So I don't know if you've already answered this question, but I'm wondering about what studies have been done on how these alterations to the natural hydrology and flow of the Pearl River, especially in the summer months when the Gulf sturgeon comes into the river to spawn, how that will impact that threatened and endangered species. And then also knowing, being a resident of that area and seeing how these changes in the hydrology affect the flow of the river, what considerations are made for the residents along the lower parts of the Pearl River in Louisiana and southern Mississippi as far as, flooding frequency or the loss of water? Because I know for a fact, there have been periods of time when there's high rain in Mississippi and the reservoirs open, which causes flooding downstream, and then also times when water is held back, because of low water levels up north, and it causes for lower and more anoxic, environments down in the lower part of the Pearl River. And then also that would also have some impacts and contribute to further saltwater intrusion as well. So not releasing the water. So there's a couple of things going on that I'm curious about, but start with the impact to the Gulf sturgeon and who's going to be able to assess that impact.
So why don't I take this one on, Leslie? So part of any of the study we do is it's a requirement to investigate what the downstream impacts will be. What we've learned from the previous 2 sessions that we did down in Slidell and other previous sessions is that, yeah, you're seeing these impacts now, just like you described. And so the Gulf sturgeon is probably struggling today because of the unpredictable water flows, be they flash flows or low flows. And so now let's expand out of the sturgeon into the citizens of the lower Pearl. Right now, you're seeing low flow situations and you're seeing flash flood situations that are taken on for an extended period of time. Right? And so the study we're doing, any project that we put in or that the secretary approves will not exacerbate any problems that are ongoing. Okay, and so I'm going to pause right there to go on to what the benefit of these public sessions and statements like this that we're getting is. You are informing, and these public sessions are informing things that might not be under this specific authority, but things that we can take forward and say, hey, this also needs to be looked into. And so we're going to take these low flow and flash flood issues and look for other authorities that we can use to either start a new study, go into a study. What can we do to alleviate flash flooding? What can we do to? So we're receiving all of this and ensuring, one, that anything that happens to reduce flood risk impacts in the city of Jackson doesn't exacerbate anything downstream. And then the second part of that is going to be a policy recommendations or things that our senior leadership in government, some of our, and things we can take to our congressional delegations that I can share with our congressional leaders that, hey, this is what we've heard, and these are other issues we have, and these are authorities that we have that we can potentially use to address that. That was long-winded, and I hope I articulated it well enough.
Yes, I just would like to state also, just to reiterate, that the Gulf sturgeon only spawns in 2 rivers, and that is the Pascagoula and the Pearl River. So any impact to the natural hydrology of either of those systems is going to have an effect on the summer spawning of that diadromous fish that comes up the mouth of the river to spawn and reproduce each year, and mostly during the summer months. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Sure.
Thank you.
So we're not seeing any other hands raised. Someone did ask a question in the chat. Is there any plans to fix the weir near Waukah Bluff?
And I'll just say that is a capacity that we continue to express to our congressional delegations. We have expressed to our congressional delegations downstream that one, there is a recognized issue associated with not only the weir at Waukah Bluff, but all the weirs along the lower Pearl. We also reiterate to them the current status of core projects on the Lower Pearl River and express to them our capacity, capability to address those. And so when we are authorized and funded, we will execute those fixes.
Okay, there are no more hands raised. So any closing remarks, Ms. Walker, Ms. Colosimo, or the commander?
Certainly, I'll let Ms. Colosimo speak with any closing remarks she may have, unless she had to drop off.
I'm still here, sorry. And sorry again, folks, my camera's not working. Hey, I appreciate everybody taking the time today, and some of you taking more than one session of time to continue to share with us your thoughts, your experiences, your views, and ask questions. This is really important collaboration, and we're going to continue to move through this process and make sure we're being as transparent as we can while trying to make sure we're putting forward good ideas that build on all the good ideas you all have shared with us. So thank you very much for that. Andrea, please add to that as needed.
I just wanted to thank everybody, and just a reminder, we can advance a solution and we can make this happen quickly. We have the authorization and we have the funding. Now we just have to make sure we develop the right plan. We provide the secretary with, again, the comparison of alternatives, pros, cons, benefits, impacts, so that he can make a decision for the good of the Pearl River Basin. Thank you.
Colonel Klein, do you have any closing remarks?
Only because you asked, Tom. Again, thanks everybody for your input. And as I mentioned before, not only are you informing this project, you're informed. All of these sessions have informed opportunities in the future and things that we need to address in the future. And so, you know, with your activism with our congressional delegations and my expression of capacity and capabilities to our congressional delegations, I think we can solve a lot of issues that are going on in the Pearl River watershed. So thanks for your time.
Okay, with that, we will conclude this virtual meeting. I thank you all for your participation. The information with respect to the website is still up. I would ask you to, at every opportunity, go out and take a look and see what's been updated. And we will continue to take your feedback and input through the 30th of June. With that, we're out here. Bye-bye all.